Hey there, I'm Christopher Schoenwald, and welcome to Life as a show intently focused on helping people find their professional pathway by exploring and unearthing the details of jobs from around the world. For listeners who have been tuning in regularly, you've probably noticed I've got this little spiel off the top where I'm asking people to go over to YouTube. I have a channel over there, Life as a ... And basically, it's just highlights from the main audio versions, from the podcast versions of these talks that I have with these great guests. And the reason I'm plugging it so hard is that I think this content really does matter. And I want to get it in front of people. I want to get it in front of youth, people that are still undecided, who just don't know what they want to do with their lives. And I think this platform, YouTube, offers that opportunity to kind of get up close and personal with some of these guests in a different format. And if you're just not into audio, if you're not into podcasting as a whole, that's fine, that's okay. Well, you can still digest the content in a different way. I would encourage you, if you do know somebody who's looking for that career, looking for some ideas, direct them over to Life as a ... over on YouTube. If they're into videos, they might just find what they're looking for over there. And while you are there, hey, I would always appreciate a like or subscribe. It's the best way to let that algorithm know that the content matters, that it should be put in front of others. Well, I do thank you for letting me ask this of you, but I think it's about time we get into today's episode. I think that we can all agree that life within the 21st century is no longer creeping towards digitization. It is full-blown blasting forward into this realm. Much, if not all, of our data is digitally stored by banks, governments, social networks, consumer enterprises, and so on. The reasons are sound. All of this digitization equals boosts in things like efficiency, transparency, and accessibility. All is well in this race to digitize everything. All right, give me a second to remove these rose-tinted glasses. Obviously, not everything is hunky-dory. Just as bad actors are lurking and ready to exploit in the physical world, they've kind of migrated to this digital realm too. And we're finding this out in the form of things like digital scams that are absolutely proliferating via phishing emails, texts, websites, etc. Ransomware organizations are on the rise too, targeting individuals and companies. And much of this is taking place in an arena some would deem the digital Wild West, aka the dark web. Well, fortunately, this space is also being patrolled and monitored by those seeking out such criminals. That is the focus of today's episode. I've got this great guest whose job it is to track dark web threat actors and alert relevant parties. Her title is that of a cyber threat intelligence and dark web advisor. Super interesting, right? You're going to learn all about this fascinating work as far as roles, responsibilities, challenges, rewards, and a heck of a lot more. So let me more formally introduce her to you, and we can get started. Mary D'Angelo is a pioneering cyber threat intelligence and dark web advisor. Mary stands at the forefront of cyber threat intelligence, helping clients understand the threats that exist on the dark web and how to use that intelligence to bolster their cybersecurity programs. Now, with a solid foundation from the University of Washington, where she earned her bachelor's degree, Mary has rapidly ascended as a global leader at SearchLight Cyber. Her expertise, honed over 6 years, delves deep into understanding the nuances of dark web threat actors and their intelligence. Mary's academic journey is marked by distinguished achievements. She was the exclusive recipient of the Washington Women in Need Scholarship in 2015 and 2016, a testament to her dedication and academic prowess. This recognition was further solidified when she received the highest student recognition award at the University of Washington, the Husky 100, setting her apart as a scholar of exceptional caliber. Now, her professional journey is equally impressive. Mary's work has been instrumental in shedding light on the shadowy aspects of cyber threats emanating from the dark web. Her work not only aids in neutralizing these threats, but also contributes significantly to the broader understanding of cybersecurity dynamics. Recently, Mary's expertise gained international recognition. She was one of only 5 practitioners invited to a prestigious Dagstuhl think tank in Warden, Germany. This 3-day event was a convergence of minds from academia and practice, aiming to forge stronger alliances in understanding and combating threats related to social engineering and the dark web. Mary's speech at the event, highlighting innovative approaches to dark web threat intelligence, garnered significant attention and acclaim. And it has paved way for the upcoming research in the field, positioning her as a thought leader and catalyst for change in cyber threat intelligence. Additionally, Mary's passion is volunteering her talents into nonprofit organizations. She was a mentor for Big Brothers and Big Sisters, and recently she's devoted her time to a nonprofit called the Innocent Lives Foundation, which uses dark web threat intelligence to help law enforcement stop child traffickers. All up, Mary D'Angelo's journey is a blend of academic excellence and professional mastery, making her a beacon in the field of cyber threat intelligence and dark web analysis. Her contributions are not only shaping current understanding, but are also charting new territories in the realm of cybersecurity. So, with all this noted, here is my conversation with Mary D'Angelo. Yeah, so welcome to the program. How are you doing today, Mary?
Good, I'm doing well. How are you?
Yeah, excellent. Been looking forward to this conversation as we were just speaking off air. It's been on my calendar for a little bit. And, I've heard a lot of great things about you and your work. And obviously, the topic of conversation today, dark web, I think is one that represents a bit of a black box for a lot of people. So yeah, like I said, interested to dive into it all. But anyway, I do have this first segment lined up. It's something called Coloring Wikipedia. As my listeners know, it's a segment where I just list off a definition related to the work of what the guest is all about or does. And surprise, surprise, I went with dark web. So let me just read that off for you, and
Okay.
perhaps we can get some comments after. Does that sound okay?
Perfect.
All right, great. Dark web. The dark web is the World Wide Web content that exists on dark nets, overlay networks that use the internet but require specific software, configurations, or authorization to access. Through the dark web, private computer networks can communicate and conduct business anonymously without divulging identifying information such as a user's location. There it is, short and sweet. First impressions, what would you say to that?
So I mean, it's accurate. It's very technical, but I would say to understand the dark web, it's better to understand from the general context of difference between deep web and clear web, because those play a big part into the intelligence piece as well. So what I would say is the dark web requires a Tor browser to gain access into. Typically, it's the onion router that people are going on. The deep web, the difference between deep web and dark web is deep web doesn't require a Tor browser, but it's sites that are very hard to gain access into. And they also are sites that would be good to track as well. And that could be Reddit, WhatsApp, App Chat, Telegram, Discord, 4chan, 8chan, those types of sites. And deep web actually makes up 80% of the internet. And then the clear web is anything you can find on Google. And funny enough, that only makes up 10% of the internet.
Okay. All right. Well, that's something, yeah, right at the gate. I think gives a different sort of look at it all. I think it clears things up for a lot of people in that sense. One thing that struck me in the definition was the fact that it was quite factual in nature, but it also seemed to miss some of the contextual factors, some of the other elements of what it sort of represents to some people who have some degree of familiarity with
Yeah.
what the dark web is. And what would you say to that?
Yeah, because when you think of the dark web, right, your first idea of it is like a criminal underground, right? Where bad actors are hanging out, you could purchase drugs. However, it's funny because the how the dark web was created, that wasn't its initial purpose. And it just kind of devolved over the years into becoming something like that. But it was created, I mean, at least the Onion Router was created by the US Navy back in, early 2000s for their operations. So, I mean, there are still good things to the dark web. I mean, the principle remains the same, where it is a space to encourage whistleblowers and for people who might be in countries that can't speak freely, they have that ability to do so through the platform.
Getting back to the US Navy and when they originally created it, what was the purpose for it from their perspective?
Mostly for undercover operations that they were working on, and so they wanted to anonymize their researchers, and so they ended up having to make the Tor browser for that.
Okay, I understand. Well, this also might be an opportune time to hear a little bit more about your work, specifically, cyber threat intelligence and dark web advisor.
Yeah. So first of all, I absolutely love the work that I get to do. It's amazing. I'm on the front lines of it all, being able to see the intelligence that comes in and then what happens after the intelligence has been actioned upon. So I work for a company called SearchLight Cyber. So we specialize in dark and deep web threat intelligence. And I work with our clients to getting them the right intelligence that they need, mostly from a security perspective, to help refine their security posture. So if you're talking with, large enterprise level organizations, their needs of dark web threat intelligence would differ from someone who, let's say a small bank out of Texas or a law enforcement agency. They would require much different dark web threat intelligence. And so I work with them understanding what their needs are, their use cases, and then making sure giving them the right intelligence to do those operations.
In terms of that, without divulging too much, obviously, in client confidentiality, would you be able to give an example, perhaps, or like a bit of a case study, like really quickly, or?
Yeah. Fun example that I can give is we were working with an organization, a healthcare organization, and it was late last year, so November, December timeline. And at that time, one of the major ransomware groups, Lockbit, was going crazy, really targeting a lot of healthcare organizations. And so, initial access brokers, so people that are on the dark web selling, not necessarily part of a ransomware group, but on their own might be selling some sort of like access or exploit or something. They were selling a lot of those that were related to healthcare hospitals. And so we saw all this increase of activity going on. So we were working with our hospital healthcare. So we already knew, okay, that we have to be, you know, very alert because we see all of this increased activity that's going on of people selling credentials to not just your hospitals, but to others in your sector, right? And then what we noticed too is as we're monitoring all this intelligence, is we saw that this particular hospital, someone had leaked data. It was old data that they leaked, but nonetheless, they did leak it and they embedded newer data within it. And that included different passwords and usernames of the employees of that hospital, which is huge, right? And then sometimes you can follow the comments on it. So you might see, other threat actors might comment on it or give their advice, or if they're purchasing something, they might request to purchase it or whatever. But in this case, there wasn't that much communication going on to this post. And it wasn't until later that we saw that those credentials were then sold. And then we saw that my favorite part is we can track traffic going to and from the dark web to this organization. And we saw high peaks of incoming dark web traffic to the hospital, which means that whoever had purchased or gained these credentials, was now trying to implement them. And so you can see it all in real time. And it was like a perfect timeline. Fortunately, the hospital was, they're on top of it all. They were receiving the intelligence, they're actioning upon it, and they knew what to do to mitigate it.
Yeah, it's frightening though to consider some of these organizations that aren't prepared for this and how would they, manage their way through it without that assistance. I can
Yeah.
certainly see the need for the work that your company does or other companies similar to that and professionals like yourself. But yeah, I'm sure we're going to get into it further. I mean, some of the other threats associated with all of this. But I was thinking maybe we could slide into this other segment, a day in the life, to add even further clarity to the work that you're doing. What would a day or even a week look like for you?
Yeah. So when it comes to cyber threat intelligence, or specifically dark web threat intelligence, the most important part is being on top of it, and understand, because it is an evolving landscape. Things change constantly. I have to start my days and end my days by really reading what these threat actors are up to, and you know tracking their movements. So that's a big part of it, is making sure I'm up to date on everything, and that changes so frequently. I mean, ransomware groups, they're not notorious for being there for a very long time. They come up, they stay for a stint, and then they are usually taken down or they fall apart themselves. And then I work a lot with clients trying to understand sort of where their gaps are, what their needs are, and how we can make sure we're implementing the right intelligence for them, because you don't just want to overload them with a bunch of intelligence that has no relevancy to them. So that's another part of it too, is like not only are we trying to get the intelligence to them on a timely level, but also making sure that it's relevant to them so that they're not then having to deal with a bunch of noise and a bunch of extra work. That's another big part of it. And then making sure just, keeping on top of how the customers are with working with the intelligence. And if anything does happen, they see something, let's say they see their credentials are being sold by a threat actor for, $5,000. What do we do with that information? Like how do we action upon it? And so then working with them to connecting them with getting the right folks that could help them, and advise them on what to do when that happens.
It sounds like to me like a lot of education,
Yeah.
self-education in terms of just staying aware and current with what's going on, but then also even with your clients, educating them about what's taking place and perhaps courses of action and whatnot. Am I on
Yeah.
anything there? Is that an accurate assessment?
Totally spot on. Because also it's changing so quickly. Like every single day there's something new. And I think especially now with like the emergence of AI, it's just happening at an exponentially faster rate. So it is hard though, like when if you put an article out there about this stuff, who knows how long, it might be a week until it then becomes inaccurate. So
Right. Yeah, it also strikes me as something that, like a pendulum swinging between, stress and pressure that causes, but then also a degree of excitement. And,
yeah.
like there's always something new to be learning. And if you're already into this, to begin with, you're constantly being, quizzed on your current knowledge and, projections as well as where things could be going. So I could see levels of, like I said, stress, but then also fulfillment on one hand.
Oh, it's so much fun. It's
Yeah.
absolutely so much fun, like, being that, basically you're on the front lines. You see it all, you can see what the threat actors are up to, what their discussions are about, and tracking it, So, there's a lot of value in that.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I have this other segment here, pathways, and maybe we'd return to you. And I'd like to know about what led you into this work. I mean, in your youth, were there particular qualities or traits that, when thinking back now, you're like, oh yeah, this was meant for me. Like this profession was where I belong based off of this, and this. Or was it something that just sort of, just happened along the way?
Yeah. So it's not gonna be as exciting, probably, this part, just because, I think I felt was very fortunate how I fell into this role, but I did come from a family of 9 children, and so most of them I'm the middle of 9, and all of them are very hardworking, programmers, doctors, lawyers, and so I always knew I wanted to do something big, right? So when I went into undergrad, I had absolutely no idea what I wanted to do. I actually majored in marketing, but it wasn't until my first job out of undergrad was a sales position for a cybersecurity company. Now they didn't do threat intelligence; it was just general network detection and response. And so it required me to move across the country to Washington D.C., where I'm at currently. And after doing that for about 5 years, that's when I really fell in love with the cybersecurity space. Like I was like, this is it for me. Like
What was it specifically? Do you recall? Like, was there one specific thing that really hooked you in initially, at least, or?
it was mostly the fast-paced environment. Seeing the work that you could do actually does tremendous effects, right? So if helping clients, from getting attacked by a ransomware group, right? And when you're on that side of it and you can see it, it means so much more when you see it come out on the news. Like, oh yeah, we did that.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was incredible. It was a space that I had no idea of originally. And then I got recruited to work for a threat intelligence company a couple years ago. And I've just absolutely loved it. So, and I think it's like my favorite niche now within cybersecurity is dark web threat intelligence, particularly.
Yeah, yeah. Getting back to your youth, were there any like particular traits or qualities or aspects of your personality do you think that aligned with this? Or
do align with it now and sort of thinking back on who you were and what you've become?
Yeah, I think I was very as a young girl, I was extremely curious, always curious. I was always asking questions. So even though that didn't directly relate to threat intelligence, a big part of that plays into threat intelligence now, right? So when you're doing your research and you're trying to track these threat actors, you have to be curious. You have to see what they're up to. And so I think that kind of translated well.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, like that curiosity and maybe even creativity to a certain degree as well, I
Yeah.
would assume, and trying to project where things could go or, a potential threat down the line for clients if they're not taking care of this or that or whatever else. I mean, I'm guessing that would also play into things as well, certain degrees of creativity on top of, layers of
Yeah.
curiosity.
Oh, yeah, lots of layers of creativity, especially when you're working with clients and they have their needs and their use cases, and you're trying to make sure that what you're providing them is valuable to them. And, if you're dealing with so many different factors at play. So, yeah, definitely being creative and
Right,
flexible
right.
with working with them.
One more quick question about you and your past. Were you always into tech? Was that something that was always an interest, or is that something that evolved over time?
So, I am from Washington State, which is a huge tech hub. So, I was very familiar with the tech space, like you have Amazon over there, Microsoft, Boeing. So, I knew tech well.
But did you like it though? Were you attracted to it? I mean,
So I wasn't originally because I didn't like what it did to Seattle because it really changed up Seattle's culture when all this tech pushed into it. So I had a kind of a bad taste in my mouth with that. But then as I started with this company, my first company in tech, it completely changed it for me. That's when I like actually started loving it. And you're on the front of it all. So
yeah, yeah. The reason I ask it, I've had so many different guests on this program who've said like, well, I had no ambition of getting into industry A, B, or C, but then through experience or being exposed to something, suddenly their world just changes and their mind opens up. And lo and behold, that's where they end up going and spending the next 10, 20, 30 years of their working lives and how much they really enjoy it. So I think it's a point worth noting here that these things do occur from time to time. And I was curious whether or not that was the case for you. And it would seem to be. So yeah, thanks for sharing that. Well, I would like to move into another segment here, our Q&A discovery. We can kind of continue this back and forth. And in introducing you off the top, I did note how a lot of your work has been instrumental as far as shedding light on some of these shadowy aspects of cyber threats, emanating from the dark web. Then also to the other side of it, neutralizing some of these dark web threats. Maybe we could hear a little bit about how you go about doing each of those things.
yeah. So basically how we work as a company is like we're collecting massive amount of data sources. So I did mention the difference between dark and deep web. So we're pulling data from both of them because at deep there's a lot of nefarious activity on deep websites as well, especially like Telegram or Reddit. And so essentially we gather all of that data, we put it into our own platform, and then we can create our own searches and our own investigations. And then we create profiles for these different ransomware groups or threat actors and then track their movements. So if they are purchasing an exploit, we can see that they're purchasing it, or we're tracking them, from bidding on something or any activity that they have, we follow all of that.
Would you say that that type of knowledge, I'm guessing like the high level organizations that are operating within that space and doing some, fairly nefarious activities, they would know the extent at which you guys are able to do all of this. But then also on the flip side, I'm guessing that there's some like fairly amateur actors out there within that space also that just don't know like the degree to which they can be tracked. Like I'm thinking that they might assume that, okay, I'm operating on the dark web here and, basically anything, almost anything that I do is going to be protected. Like no one's going to
Yeah.
see.
That's true. You have to think of it in the perspective of these threat actors. So they are financially motivated, right? So, and they're going to do things that they've had success with, and then they're going to keep replicating that. So they have certain tactics, certain processes, procedures that they follow that's very unique to them. And so once you have an understanding of what those look like, it makes it a lot easier to track their movements. And they know they know people are monitoring them. So because of that, there are some certain tactics that they've then incorporated to try to bypass some of these, if people are watching them. But then again, since we know that, we keep tracking it. So it's kind of like a cat and mouse game. But for the most part, I mean, some of these ransomware groups, they're very successful at what they do, very, very successful. And they have a process of how to do it, and they stick to that process. And so, what we have to do is we built out that process with the cyber kill chain, and then we follow where they might be, where they land based off of their movements in the dark web, how far along the process they are in.
It sounds like to me like a lot of patterns, like recognizing patterns, following patterns, and then also being aware that some of these actors might break patterns on purpose to kind of, yeah,
Yeah.
dust up the trail a little bit. And then also you guys having to try and anticipate some of those patterns being broken, perhaps. Or I can see again where the curiosity, creativity comes into this, no doubt.
Yeah, because oftentimes threat actors will know that if I'm a company, they know I want to monitor what is being said about my company on the dark web. And so what they'll do is, if they, let's say they had access to my company, they would say they won't explicitly name my company, but they'll name where I'm based or what my revenue is and what type of access that they have. And so it does require a little work on our end, trying to narrow down to find exactly who that company is. They do that on purpose, because they don't want us to find out that they have that certain level of access.
Yeah, yeah. You can also imagine this being, like you said, fairly fast paced in the sense that they're not there very long. So, like,
Yeah.
you have to be on your toes and working as quickly and efficiently as possible to be able to, like, keep up and to go after them. Yeah. This notion of being on the front lines, you've mentioned a couple times over now already. I mean, you're seeing it, like you said, all unfold before your eyes, and you've really got to be aware and knowing what you're doing to be able to combat some of this. So yeah, I can see a certain degree of thrill and excitement associated with all of this. And yeah, the level of fulfillment and reward that you're getting from some of the work, once you are able to track some of these people down.
Oh, it is. It's such an amazing feeling. Absolutely.
Mm. Okay, I'll get this other question here, and it's kind of on the heels of the last one. I understand that you've yourself have developed this reputation for helping others better understand cybersecurity issues. And in fact, you were recently invited to this prestigious think tank in Germany to speak on this topic of dark web and combating some of the threats and social engineering and all these different topics here. And also, your speech ignited some discussion and even reverberated to the point where it led to further research on this topic being initiated. I'd love to know a little bit more about some of your innovative approaches to dark web threat intelligence that definitely appealed to some people, and why do you think it resonated so much?
It's a really good question. Thank you. So when it comes to cybersecurity, I feel most of the time security teams are just like running at the seat of their pants. And they find out they're being targeted, they don't have enough time, and then they end up just having to pay the ransom or whatever they end up doing. So with threat intelligence, really the value behind threat intelligence is, and we call the cyber kill chain. So it's basically the 7 steps a threat actor takes to complete their objectives. Most of the time, people aren't alerted until that they're being targeted until like steps 3 to 5. But if you are leveraging threat intelligence properly, you could be alerted at the very first step, at the reconnaissance phase. So the stage where the threat actor is just beginning their exploratory efforts and trying to figure out where the vulnerabilities might lie, or how they plan to break into that company, that network. And so my talk was about the power in dark web threat intelligence and being able to monitor it correctly and then responding to it in a timely manner. And so a lot of research came out from it, from the conference, about maybe finding ways to sort of predict. So based off of threat intelligence that we have, this massive data set that we have, can we predict movements of the threat actors, or what part of the kill chain are they currently at? So are they at, delivery? Are they at installation? Where are they sitting based off of their movements? And that would be huge. If that research goes through, that would be massive.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's shifting the whole mindset rather than being reactive, right? I mean, waiting
Yeah.
for these things to unfold. You're actually being in place and ready for them, and yeah, being a few steps ahead to be able to combat some of these threats. Huh. It also sort of strikes me the fact that your industry and what you're part of is still very much evolving, right? Like this would seem to be in like in a lot of other industries, theoretically speaking, things that have already been discussed, have already been sort of established, but you're right on the forefront of all of this evolving right now. And the fact that you are not only acting within this space, you're actually, influencing how things are potentially unfolding or could unfold and shifting and shaping the industry. That must be a rather rewarding experience unto itself.
Yeah, it is a very, very interesting space because most of the time to get into threat intelligence usually requires some sort of like military background. And so being able to use it for cybersecurity is really fascinating. I mean, to see these threat actors, to get a view into their movements and their conversations, and then trying to piece it all together to see, okay, I wonder what like, did they purchase that exploit? And then if they did, what do they plan to do with that? Who are they targeting? It's kind of like, it's a puzzle, putting it all together. And then you have to be proactive when it comes to cybersecurity.
Yeah, yeah. And like I said, returning to your contribution to it outside of like your daily work, looking at it from that theoretical perspective on how to actually structure the entire space or industry that you're within and helping align some of the people that are operating in that space to be better prepared for it, to
Yeah.
have the resources available that are going to be directed towards actually combating some of these things. And yeah,
Yeah.
that must be exciting, an exciting thought too.
So there's a lot of education that requires it because threat intelligence is pretty new within cybersecurity, right? It's becoming more and more popular. So it requires a lot of education in it. And then also the action piece of it. Okay, I get this piece of intel. Now what do I do? How do I respond? And so it's also being able to manage the action as well.
Well, I have this other question here too. In terms of, I guess, like what you're encountering in your work, the individuals that you come across, some of the organizations, the
Yeah.
ideas, that sometimes like well, certainly on the dark web, not always the best people, not the best intentions in that space. So that must be a challenge to deal with at different points. But then also on the flip side of things, you're working with organizations, NGOs perhaps, that are working to combat some of what you're seeing, some of this depravity, of what humanity sort of represents, at least within that space that you're operating in. So as an individual in that sphere, what is it like, having to manage these emotions of seeing some terrible things and what they represent, but then also having that light there that you have people like yourself, you have other organizations that are trying to combat this. How do your emotions swing between that? How do you control? How do you manage those feelings?
That's a really good question. It is true. If you are spending a large amount of time going through different forums and marketplaces and seeing what's for sale, you start ending up getting a very like bleak view of humanity, right? Like,
Yeah.
oh my God, like this is absolutely terrible.
Sorry to interrupt there. I mean, I just had recently on this program a guest on who's combating things like internet crimes against children, and some of the things that
Yeah.
are, being sold or being pushed around within that sphere. I mean, that's certainly a dark, dark topic, but that's reality. I mean, those things do occur. So, I mean, certainly within your work, there's probably data sets that you come across or your colleagues do, things of that nature, and worse perhaps. That
Yeah.
must be a challenge. But then, like I said, there are people out there in organizations that are trying to fight this, that are trying to combat all of that. It must be a bit of a
Yeah.
wild ride, emotionally speaking.
Yeah. It's interesting too to seeing the personalities of these different threat actors and ransomware groups as a whole and how they speak to each other. And we know that they're financially motivated, right? So they're going to do things so that they can getting some money at the end of it. But then you can know what their goals are and like how direct they can be and almost kind of insensitive because there's some ransomware groups that have a morality code. So some will say like, we won't go after hospitals. We won't go after healthcare institutions. We will only go after, big banks and law firms. Whereas we have some ransomware groups that they'll just go after anything. I mean, there's one group that only goes after children's hospitals. It is weird to see the difference, like nuance, especially when it comes to morality on there. Some have a moral
Yeah.
code and some don't. And so, but that's important to monitor as well, though. So, like if you're a healthcare organization, you want to make sure those guys that have absolutely no moral code, that they would go after any hospital, any children's hospital. You want to make sure you're following their movements. And then on the other side to it, though, is like we're working with security teams. So, and if all different levels, understanding like what their pain points are and what, how to refine their security posture to help prevent some of these new tactics these threat actors have out there. So in that sense, it is a good feeling when you're working with the client itself to actually being able to help them mitigate risk, have different steps in place to actually stop it. So
In terms of yourself, do you find your emotional swings going back and forth, or are you fairly just steady and even throughout?
yeah, there's some days. There was this one ransomware group that I follow that I don't particularly like just because you mentioned they go after children's hospitals. And to me, that is, I find that it's so low, and so that sometimes it can get to me a little bit. I don't really do a lot of work with like the trafficking or, the drugs or the law enforcement side of things. So if I was dealing with that, that would be a completely different case. That would be extremely hard. But, fortunately, I'm just working with groups that just want to attack big banks.
All right. Well, I have one more question within this segment here, and this one's more on a personal and maybe even philosophical sort of level. And I'd love to know about what this work means to you.
It's a really good question. I guess my goal at my company right now is we're trying to use the intelligence for pre-attack purposes. So to make sure clients have the information that they need to stop themselves from being targeted attack. Preferably, earlier on the kill chain as possible. And it's really hard to say, but if you are able, let's say you find a piece of intel that's related to a customer, and then you do further research, you find more intel and you gather it all together and you give it to the client and you let them know this is what it is, this is what we think that they are planning to do, this is what we suggest you should do. And if they do all of that, and if they don't get hit, you can't say for sure that they were going to get hit in the first place, right? So you can't say like, oh, we saved them from a ransomware attack. You can never be 100% sure on that. So for me, it's like, even though I can't say, oh, I helped save this hospital or help save this from
Yeah.
a company being completely network destroyed. It does feel good though that the intelligence that we do provide gives them value and that, hopefully keeps their security posture more refined.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. I get that. And also, too, perhaps even as well, if you have clients that align with some things that are important to you. You mentioned like children's
Yeah.
hospitals, perhaps, is one example. But I mean, if you're helping some of those organizations avoid some of these threats and allowing them to do work that, like I said, aligns with your values and what you think is important within this world, you could also probably, attach some sort of meaning to things like that. I'm guessing as well, at least.
Yeah, definitely. And it's good too when you become very close with your clients and understanding all the weights that are on their shoulders and how we can help with that. Yeah, exactly. Especially when you're working with hospitals and education systems and maybe places that don't have the financial means to invest in large security tools, just a little bit of intel to help them ready themselves.
Yeah, I mean, it must be like such a frightening space for some of these organizations to deal with or to have to even entertain the thoughts of handling issues like this. So, in speaking with people like yourself, I'm guessing that you might act as a bit of a crutch for them at times and giving them some confidence in how to proceed or how to prepare themselves. So, yeah, there must be value there too, I'm guessing.
Oh yeah. So sometimes you give them this piece of intelligence that's just like horrendous, right? Like really scary. Sometimes they'll be like, what do I do? What do we do? And I'm like, okay, we'll take care of it. we've dealt with this before. We can, bring on the right people to help support. So
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I didn't even consider that until you just brought that up there, but it's like sort of like managing emotions on the client side. Well, we are moving on at a pretty good clip here. And I do have this middle segment, a water cooler story segment. And here I just ask guest indulged listeners with a story related to their work. So I'm really interested to hear what you have for us today, Mary.
yeah, this is actually one of my favorite stories. It speaks to what we were talking about today, is using intelligence to stop potential cyber attacks. One of my human intelligence analysts, so they are the ones that go undercover, gain access into some of these sites. They found a piece of intelligence that they sent to me about how some threat actor was selling a major airline's their like domain access control credentials. And they were selling it at a pretty high price. So sometimes when threat actors or initial access brokers are selling something, it's hard to verify if it's true or not. But we were able to engage with the threat actor, and to us, our confidence level felt like this is legitimate. So then I was like, okay, well, I don't know. They're not a client of ours, and we're not exactly sure who this airline is. Right. So we had to do, just based off of what the threat actor said, they make it very, very broad, right? Because they don't want the airlines to know either. So then being able to then do the research to narrow it down to who we think this airline is most likely. Because if you're going to giving this information, you want to firstly make sure it's legitimate, and then also that it's them and not someone else. And so once I got to that point and I felt confident enough, like 90% confident enough, I then went and I reached out to them. I reached out to everyone on their security team, and I brought it up to them. I was like, I have a piece of intelligence for you. You should be aware about. And so they set up a call and I presented it to them, and they were like, oh, like that's when they were like, what do we do?
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah.
And then when I reached out to my team, put together, okay, right now, this is what we suggest to do. Here's like 5 steps that you can take to help protect yourselves. It looks like, it seems like the threat actor is trying, this is how they want to get into your system. So this is how we think you need to mitigate it. This is what, enforce MFA across all systems, things like that. And that was, oh my God, that was such an amazing feeling. Like firstly finding that piece of intel. They weren't even the customers. And then reaching out to them and being the first to tell them about this. And then having a meeting set up with the entire team, walking them through the intel that we found, was really, really amazing experience.
Yeah, I bet. I bet. Is that fairly unusual as far as like finding a client that way? Or is that almost a standard practice where like just by chance these things come up and, you know, they need
Yeah.
somebody obviously at that point, or they probably do, or they want someone. And the fact that your organization or organizations like yours dig this up and are able to find it in such a timely manner that they can still do something about it, I'd imagine that might be a fairly convincing way of landing clients as well. Does it happen all
Yeah.
that often?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that in itself just demonstrates the value of the tool,
Right,
right? They're like,
exactly.
okay.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So that certainly helps. But oftentimes there is a lot of, for like smaller size organizations, there we see initial access brokers selling credentials for companies of all different sizes. And so for those, if they're not clients, that's really, really hard to monitor. And that would require a lot of effort on our end to track down who these are and then, send it over. And then you'd also don't want to, if you're not 99% sure that this is the target, you don't want to freak them out either. So,
It's a fine line then, isn't it?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Okay. Well, thanks for sharing that. Yeah, it's an interesting look that I think, well, I know myself had no idea like that sort of interactions or those types of interactions existed in that way. And then also kind of like getting into the weeds a little bit about how, companies like yours are able to source and find clients by like doing good for one, but then also, like,
yeah.
just the, I don't know, random nature of it at times, I guess. Well, I do have one last segment here, a crystal ball segment. As the name implies, we're looking towards the future, trends, predictions, so on and so forth. You've already brought this up in the conversation today, and we've spoken lightly about it. It's this nature of like cat and mouse between some of these bad actors within the space that you're operating within. And also this factor of technology, how it's constantly evolving, changing. You mentioned right off the top, things are shifting and molding themselves in a different way each and every day. So what would you say to that? I guess the role of technology in your world, and how big of a factor it is playing constantly.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Because I mean, especially now with like the emergence of AI, I feel like everything is just moving at a much, much faster pace. And so we have recently, like when ChatGPT came out, that was really awesome for us. Like, in terms of like, you could also use it for bad, but for good, there's a way, it's like an assistant to help you with some of the work that you want to do. At the same time, though, there was also a fraud GPT that was created. And that was like used by threat actors to build malicious code or, right. Even a lot of it had to do with like building out phishing emails or writing social engineering words, and especially because these threat actors are usually Russian or Chinese based. And so if they're not native English speakers, then the fraud GPT would really help them with building out the emails that they're looking for. Definitely it gets really tricky with that. I mean, it is scary to think that, they've probably, we have seen ransomware groups increase their recruitments within, the last couple months or so, which only means that they plan to increase their attacks. And they have pretty large budgets now, and they're really investing a lot of that into technology. And so it's like an arms race, like cyber arms race. As long as we keep up to it all, I think it'll be okay. But it is very scary to see how quickly things are evolving.
Yeah, absolutely. Like that, when I was entertaining the notion of this conversation and researching it and getting into it a little bit, just again from a layman's perspective, like that to me was what really sort of like threw me a bit, is what you just shared there. Is like technology represents so much on both sides of the coin. It's a game changer on both sides, but it's about, like you said, just keeping up, I suppose, and staying ahead of things. And also too, I guess, like we were speaking about earlier, it's like these patterns and trying to like pick up on them, and then also noticing when their patterns are being broken at different points and being able to
Yeah.
identify it, anticipate as well. So exciting space to be within. Pressure
Yeah.
cooker at times, I'm sure, but all the same, high degrees of fulfillment,
Yeah.
I would assume. So, well, we are approaching the hour mark in this conversation. I can't believe it. We feel like we just got started here, but I can't thank you enough for all your time and insights. It's been an absolute pleasure. Yeah, thanks for coming on and joining the program.
Yeah. Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure for me as well.
Now, for those interested in learning more about Mary and her work, you can do so via LinkedIn. You can also find her and her company at SearchLight Cyber. And for reference, all this information, including links, will be in the show notes. And also too, hey, if you like today's show, please be sure to share and tell a friend. You can also show further support by rating, reviewing, and subscribing wherever you access your podcasts. And then lastly, as I mentioned off the top, head on over to YouTube. I do have that channel over there where you can check out video highlights of the conversation. And if you do go over there, I would love, 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 love a like or subscribe. And don't forget to join us on the next episode of Life as a, where we'll continue to explore and unearth the details of professions and the people behind them. I'm your host, Christopher Schoenwald. Until next time, stay curious about life and living.